Hello everybody and welcome to the Hebraic seminar. We will be having a great time tonight. As you'll notice, we asked you to type 1 in the chat box just to make sure that you're with us. Only if you're ready to be blown away though. So tonight we are going to be learning something that has over 80 biblical references. Namely the blowing of the shofar. And we will begin, if you don't mind, by taking our shofar here and starting with a short blast. My thought was that we would start on a high note tonight, and pardon the pun. So, the webinar that we are having today here is sponsored and a part of the Hebraics Institute. The Hebraics Institute is the institute that will bring the Bible alive, give you access to everything you need to know about the Bible, and let's just see over here, it is once again giving us a little bit of technical help, or technical difficulty I should say. Let's see. Okay, one more time we're going to try to open that. My apologies. If you're able to hear me clearly, give me a 2 in the chat box please. Okay. So, all right, sorry about that. If you can hear me clearly now, please give us a 5, so this way we know you're with us. So while we wait for the technical details to pop up over here so I can show you all the different images and stuff we prepared for you, I want to just take you through some of the meanings of the shofar. Now the shofar blasts, we'll take you right over here, there's 4 different sets of blasts that we have in the shofar. The sounds of the shofar, I'm just curious, can you see that straight or is that in reverse by you? So there's the tekiah. The tekiah is the straightforward blast of the shofar. The shavarim, which is the second, is 3 short blasts, the same length as 1 long tekiah, but all combined to make that length. And then there's the teruah, which is 9 short blasts as well. If you are familiar with these 3 different sounds, please type the number 9 in our chat box. We'll be able to know that you're with us. All right? And I'm going to assume that you saw that the same way I saw that and it was straight in your screen, but if it was reversed, let me know so we'll know for next time. The shofar starts off with a beautiful, beautiful message to each and every one of us. It is the cry of the essence of the soul. And I want to tell you a little story that was told over by the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of what's called the Hasidic movement, a great, great scholar, and he taught us a beautiful, beautiful meaning, using a metaphor, to the crying out of the shofar. The story goes, a king, for some reason most of those start with a king, has only one son, the apple of his eye, somebody that he loves and reveres and treasures and once in a while spoils. And the king wanted his son to master different fields of knowledge and to experience various cultures. So he sent him off to a faraway country, supplied with a generous amount of serious quantities of silver and gold. Now, far away from home, the son, having never been raised to take care of himself before, unfortunately squanders away all of the money in a very short amount of time until he was left completely destitute. Now, in his distress, he resolved he's going to return to his father's house after much difficulty. And he managed finally to struggle as a pauper to hitchhike, and he made it back to the palace. However, guess what? He didn't look like a prince anymore. And the palace guards did not recognize him. And therefore, try as he may with all of his arguments and all of his begging, they would not let him in. And he begged to see the king, and they said, we don't let beggars just come in and see the king. So he did the only thing he knew how to. When all the arguments failed, and he cried and everything, he started to wail, to shout from the depths of his heart. And finally, the loud cries emanating from within him went through over the palace gates, into the window, into the palace, into the throne room where the king sat. And the king recognized those cries. He recognized that voice. He ran out of the room. He ran to the gate of the palace himself, and he embraced his only son. That, my friends, is the message, the very core message of the blowing of the shofar. The blowing of the shofar reminds us that we are God's only son, the son being a metaphor as well, a child. And actually in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 1, is where it tells us that we are called God's only child. And the king sends a soul down into the world, and he's, in order to fulfill the Bible and all of its codes, all of its mitzvot, all of its commandments. However, the soul down here in the world becomes very distant, and it forgets everything it was accustomed to up in heaven. And in the long exile that we're in, which is a state of sleeping almost, we waste away all of our potential sometimes. Comes along the time of the year when we're reminded that this can't be. We are here for a precious mission. We are here with tremendous potential. And our soul wakes up and it says, where have I gone? What have I done? And it comes rushing back to the gates of the palace. It comes rushing back to heaven. However, it doesn't feel at home. Even there, it feels like it's uncomfortable. It feels, this is not who I am the rest of the year. Am I a hypocrite? And therefore, the only way the palace guards let us in is if we cry. We cry out with that simple, straightforward call of the shofar. And when we do that, the king himself hears this cry, hears that simple cry, and the king says, this is my only son. This is my only child. Welcome home. Welcome back. So that is the first and foremost message. Beautiful little metaphor, a message of our shofar. But we are going to learn in particular a few more of the details of the shofar sounds, the sounds themselves, and then if we have time, we will go through the message we can learn from the actual shape of the shofar as well. If that message, if that story was an inspiration to you, please let us know in the notes. Give us an 8. That's 1 more than 7, which is the cycle of nature. 8 means infinity. It's above and beyond. It's more than you could have expected. So let's go through the meaning of the different sounds. The 3 sounds of the shofar are, as we mentioned before and I showed you, there's the tekiah. The tekiah is the long, straightforward blast. This tekiah sounds as follows. Just so you know, if anybody ever turns red in the face, it means that they never properly learned the technique to blow the shofar. If you learned it from the proper person, from someone who taught you how to do it properly, you would never need to turn red in the face. It doesn't require a tremendous amount of work, even though it comes from the essence of your soul. So the tekiah is that straightforward sound. Then comes the shivarim. The shivarim, as you'll notice, are 3 broken sounds. It's 1 tekiah, but it's broken in 2 places, if you will. And it sounds as follows. And it sounds like gasps, shorter than the tekiah, but longer than the next sound, which is the teruah. You'll notice the teruah is 9 very short blasts, and the teruah sounds like this. Now it has to be a minimum of 9, but it can be more. If it's less than 9, then it has to be done over again. So you can hear more than 9 of those, but less than 9 wouldn't be good. And then comes the Tekiah Gedola, which is the final end of the sound, which we're going to learn all of those meanings and all those messages. The Tekiah Gedola is a little bit longer than the Tekiah, but it sounds just like it. And it ends on a high note. So what are the messages? What are the meanings behind those 4 different notes? Now I say 4 because even though I've only showed you 3 over here, the Tekiah Gedola is the Tekiah that completes that cycle. If you ever wondered whether there was more to the sounds that you were hearing from the shofar, then give us a 4 in the chat. I'd like to see that. So first and foremost, I want to give you the meaning of the actual sounds. So the Tekiah represents the unbroken, pure sound of hope. It's that long blast. It's that strong force. It begins it. It's hopeful. It's something which is calling out when you still have a strong connection. Interestingly, the Tekiah, according to one of the Kabbalists, which I want to get to in just a moment, which is this, it represents the cycle of mankind, and I'll explain that in just a moment, but the Tekiah represents the righteous individual. The Tekiah is strong, it's hopeful, it's pure. Then comes the Shavarim. And as I mentioned to you, the Shavarim is broken because it has that aspect of someone who is ill, someone who is gasping, someone who is calling out, but they're not quite there. They're not strong. They've messed up in life. They are trying to return. So it's drawn out gasps like someone who is ill. Then comes the teruah, these 9 short, broken little blasts. And that actually is the short outbursts, the sobbing, when someone is truly heart-wrenched and going through a tremendous amount of difficulty. That is what the teruah represents. So that's the basic message behind those. And we are meant to contemplate and meditate on those aspects of our relationship. Anybody who's been in a relationship definitely can tell you that at certain points in the relationship, they had the high notes. They had the Tekiah. The relationship was strong. They were powerful. They felt hopeful. There were times when they messed up, where they felt apart, and there were the gasps. There was the Shavarim, and there were even the times. And a relationship that doesn't have the teruah isn't a really developed relationship yet. The teruah where it sobs. It's really, really heartfelt. It's a feeling that you're afraid, maybe I've messed up, maybe I've lost this relationship. That's what the teruah represents. The Shaloh HaKadosh, which is the first Kabbalist we're going to talk about tonight, tremendous insight into each of these sounds. And he tells us that these sounds, actually the 4 sounds, because the Tekiah Gedola, the end one, is different than the first Tekiah. Who does the Tekiah represent? So I made a mention before. The Tekiah is supposed to represent the tzaddik, the righteous individual, the person who has never sinned, the one who has what we call the walking on the straight path, the straight and narrow. He does not have to be the one to learn from his mistakes. He is the role model for everybody to follow. That is the Tekiah. Then comes the Shavarim. So we said the Shavarim are the drawn-out gasps. The Shavarim is significant of the fact that this person finally recognizes that they're ill. There's an old Yiddish expression that it's Yedeya HaMachla is halba refuah, to know that you're sick is half the cure. The gasps, the Shavarim, are someone who's come to terms with and come to recognize, I am not where I need to be. I'm distant. I'm far away. I'm not close. I'm not strong. I'm far. And they gasp. They call out, I want to come back. I want to return. Then comes, so who is that? That's someone who is not where they needed to be all the time. They made a mistake, they made an error, they've sinned. Then comes the teruah, says the Shalah. The teruah represents the soul, the poor, captive soul, who is stuck in a person who chooses to sin. And the teruah, the sounds of the sobbing, the heart-wrenching sobs, calling out in barely audible short blasts, that teruah is a person who is, the soul is suffering by the sobs of the dying soul, suffering from the worst sins of what has to go through. Anybody who's been in captivity, and unfortunately we're learning about those who are in captivity in subhuman, in terrible conditions, and when they come out, they go through tremendous amount of therapy, and they'll tell you of the suffering they felt while they were there. They thought that there was no hope, and when they feel there's no hope, their hearts broke, and they felt this heart-wrenching sob, and that is the dying, this fear of dying, the fear of being lost forever. That is the sound of the teruah. That person who unfortunately chooses to ignore their soul, and their soul is crying out, fearing that it's practically dead, it's practically drowned. And finally comes the last sound, the Tekiah Gedolah, that are even more powerful than the first Tekiah. What does that represent? If you think you know what that last Tekiah represents, give me a number 6 in the chat box. And if you have no clue, just put a question mark. That final blast, the Tekiah Gedolah, the Shalah represents the power of Teshuvah. Teshuvah means return. A lot of people call it repentance, which is a horrible translation. Teshuvah comes from a fascinating Hebrew word, which is Taf, Shin, Vav, Vet, and Hey. The first 4 letters of that word, Tashuv, means to return. So what's the Hey doing there? The Hey represents God, Hashem. And we need to remember that throughout life, throughout the year, we've gotten distracted. We were like that boy, that son, that prince that we spoke about at the start tonight. And we forgot who we were. We forgot where we came from. We squandered away all of our potential. All that really happened was that we forgot where we came from. We turned away from God momentarily, temporarily. And all that is required for us to get back is to just turn around and face Him again. Teshuvah doesn't mean repentance. You're not starting over. You're not changing yourself. You're merely turning in the right direction. That step instantaneously brings you back to where you were. So the last blast of the shofar, the Tekiah Gedolah, that is the power of Teshuvah. And the Tekiah Gedolah is capable of taking even a soul that is finding itself in a state of the teruah, that it is drowning, that it is sobbing, it feels it is dying, and it can bring it back to even higher than the first Tekiah, higher and stronger than the tzaddik, the righteous individual who always walked on the straight and narrow. As the Torah tells us, the Bible promises us that a person, b'makom, sheba'alei tshuva omdim, afilu tzaddikim gemurim eine yecholum lamod, in a place where a returnee can stand, reaches, even the most righteous individuals are incapable of reaching. The power of Teshuvah is a leap, and it leaps beyond anything a person who climbs the narrow, straight and narrow their whole life can ever reach. Those are the messages of the cycle of mankind and the meaning of the blowing of the shofar. Now there's some deeper meaning as well, but if you received what you thought you were receiving tonight when you came to join us in our webinar, I'd like to hear. If you can, give me a number 10 in the chat notes. I want to make sure that everybody received what they were hoping to receive. If not, now is the time for me. I'm going to ask you to type up your questions in the chat. I will give us 5 minutes towards the end of this webinar to try to answer those questions. But I can tell you, if you type them up when I say it's time for questions and answers, they will arrive after we have already answered everybody else's questions. So now is a good time for you to start asking those questions. Now, while you type up those questions, I want to go into some of the deeper meaning, and then we're going to end with a very brief story, another metaphor, another beautiful message of the shofar blowing and the shofar meaning of the sounds. So spiritually and psychologically, the shofar also means the following. The message, the sounds of the shofar mean the following. And then we will get into, hopefully, the message of the shape of the shofar and the messages of why the shofar has to be shaped and where it comes from and the material that it needs to be made from. Those have messages for us as well. Anybody who's followed our Facebook posts, and if you haven't, I encourage you right now to go to facebook.com/Hebraics, and we will keep you updated on all the exciting upcoming webinars and classes and seminars. As a matter of fact, at this point, it would be a very good thing for me to tell you that we have, by request, a fascinating course. It's a 4-week course that will give you everything you've ever wondered about the Feast of the Tabernacles, what we call Sukkot in the Bible. And it will begin this coming Monday. And if you want to join that, you should register online. I'm going to actually set that up for you now, so you'll have a link over here to join that. Let's see here. It should pop up right now on the right side over there. That is our Feast of Tabernacles 4-week course, and you should have the ability to sign up to it by clicking on that link over there. If you don't see it there, again, go to our Facebook page. The link for that will be up on our Facebook page in the near future. We're also going to take this opportunity to ask you a few questions in just a moment, but before we do that, and I'm glad to see the great feedback from everybody that the meaning and the messages were exactly what you were looking for. Let's go into some of the deeper meaning, because that's just skimming the surface, believe it or not, of the meaning of the shofar sounds as well. So first and foremost, some of the spiritual or psychological or physiological meaning of the shofar sounds is as follows. The Kabbalistic reason behind the particular sounds of the shofar is that it sweetens the severe judgments, or sweetens the severities. In Hebrew, we recall that the Hebrew of that is not so important because it'll take us a long time to explain, and I won't be able to give you the content right this moment. Even though Hebrew is always important, if you hear it in the original, you'll be able to understand it a lot better once you understand that. So the sweetening of the severe judgments, which is, in other words, what does that mean? That's a Kabbalistic description of the accomplishments of the blowing of the shofar. What that means actually is that you're transferring or transforming that which is in the mode of judgment, and instead it becomes something which is the mode of compassion. So anybody who's ever been judged by someone else knows it's not a good feeling. You don't appreciate being judged. Now, that's true even if the judge doesn't have any true power over you. Now, for sure, if the judge is actually judging whether you live or die, whether you should be blessed for the coming year or the opposite of that, then it's certainly not only is it not a good feeling, there's a tremendous awe and trepidation and fear of the outcome of that case. And that's not something which is necessarily positive. However, Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment, it's also a day of renewal. It is a wonderful, positive day. So the shofar blowing is the secret to that. The shofar blowing allows us to, as the Midrash tells us, it takes God and it inspires him to go from the seat of judgment to stand up, again, metaphorically speaking, and walk over to his seat of compassion. And those are the words in Kabbalistic teachings, but most people generally conjure up an image of a literal person standing up. What it really actually means is it changes the mode of the day from a mode of judgment to a mode of compassion. And how does it do that? So the Kabbalists teach us that because the shofar makes a sound from deep within us, from the essence of who we are, what you can express in words is limited. There is a time when it hurts so bad, when it comes from so deep within that no words could possibly express it. That is the sound of the shofar. And anybody who is a parent of a child and hears a child, a baby, an infant cry, they can't stand by idly. You can't ignore the cry of a child. We are God's children. And when he hears our cry through the shofar, that essential call, that essential cry, even if we're sleeping, we wake up when our children cry like that. God also wakes up. And he wakes up his feelings of compassion. And he says, I'm not going to judge them. I'm going to go over to the seat of compassion, and I'm going to judge them favorably and grant them a year of life and a year of health and a year of happiness. So that is one of the accomplishments of the blowing of the shofar, and that's what the Midrash describes, actually, using the seats as a metaphor for that mode. Now, additionally, the sound of the shofar reflects the purest cry of the human soul, as we mentioned, in search of God, its source. And just like a child who's lost in the forest would cry out, even if it doesn't know if anyone can hear him, that's what we call the shofar blasts. The shofar sound is a result of, a very important message, the narrow confines of the mouthpiece. When you make the sound go through the ear, it actually goes through the ear and opens up and bounces off the walls as it gets larger, and that's what amplifies the sound of the shofar. And that's a metaphor for us as well. When we feel constrained, we feel we're stuck, we feel lost, and we're calling out to God. So the shape of the shofar teaches us that all we need to do is make a small opening in our heart, and God will open up the expanse of heavens in response to us. And finally, we'll end tonight with this thought and this message of the messages of the sounds of the shofar, that the sequence of sounds reflects the journey. This is different than the statement of the Shalah, of the commentary we quoted earlier tonight, that it reflects the journey into the deeper recesses of the heart and soul. So the tekiah, that first sound that I mentioned to you, the long, strong, hopeful one, this is the cry of the soul that can still be expressed in a long, drawn-out sound. As you get deeper into the soul, you're incapable of even expressing a sound, never mind words. You're so deep that you become incapable of expressing even such a sound. So the tekiah is the first call, the first dive into the soul. When you're still removed enough that you're capable of making that strong call. Then comes the shavarim. You get so deep, you can't even make such a strong call. Then comes the teruah. The teruah, in the process of returning to our essence and returning to our Creator, the source of our soul, is that you're so close to the essence that guess what? You can barely make any noise altogether. And it comes out as 9 short sobs. I have a secret to tell all of you tonight. In between each of these groups, the person blowing the shofar, as well as those hearing the shofar sounds, are meant to confess silently. What does that mean, to confess silently? Isn't that a contradiction in terms? Either you're confessing, so you're speaking. Confession by definition means you're stating what you've done wrong, which is one of the necessary ingredients to repairing that, or making amends. To teshuvah, that we mentioned before. Teshuvah, to return to God, requires that you confess to God. But then it says silently. How can you confess silently? And the answer is, you're so deep in the essence of your soul that nothing can possibly come out. No words can possibly express that. So between the groups of those confessions is the actual time when the silent confession happens and the epitome of the essence of your soul comes out. That, ladies and gentlemen, are the messages of the shofar. I will take a few moments to answer your questions, but before we do, I promised you something, which was a quick story. So a parable by Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, one of the great Hasidic masters. He said that a king was once traveling in a forest and he lost his way until he met a man. Of all the people he met, none of them, because he was in his hunting clothes, recognized him as the king. But this man was very wise. He was no fool. He realized immediately that this person is very special. And he gave him the respect that a king deserves. And he, unlike all the others, like who ignored their king, he took this king who was lost back to the palace gates. The king was so impressed and so grateful that he rewarded him, and he actually made him into a minister, and he took him as is with his clothes, and he made him turn in his regular layman's clothes, and he gave him royal clothes, and he gave him clothes that fit a minister of the king, and he gave him a new home, and he gave him wealth, and he gave him a position of honor. However, as often happens to somebody who's not ready for the great blessings that are bestowed upon them, this minister, after a long time being there actually, made a mistake. And he rebelled against the king by a small action, but he did something which caused him to be guilty of the death penalty. And the king said that I have no choice but to punish you. Do you have any last words in your defense? Because he really loved him. He didn't want to punish him. So this person said, yes, I do. He said, if you can give me the original clothes that I came to your palace with, I'd like to get dressed in them again. And he made one other request to the king. Your Honor, Your Majesty, if you could dress in the same pair of clothes that you wore that back in the first time that you and I met. And the king granted him his wish. And when he did, the king said to him, Chayecha, your life you have just saved by your actions. Because he reminded the king that the very life of the king was saved by this person because he reenacted the wearing of the clothes and the experience of this person saving the king's life. So we also do the same idea. The beginning of the story of the Jewish people way back when in the Bible starts with Abraham in the 10 tests. And Abraham's 10th test is to slaughter his only son. And when he's slaughtering his only son and about to start, God says, stop. He sends an angel and he says, in place of your son, go take a ram. So we blow the ram's horn. We remind God where it all began. And even if we're not worthy, even if we have done things which may not have stood out to deserve God's favor, we remind him that it all began way back when with the shofar blowing, or with a ram's horn in place of Abraham's son. And that's a beautiful another message, and that's particularly why we specifically tried to use a ram's horn on shofar. We did not have enough time to tell you about the shapes, but I do want to take a couple moments to answer any questions that people had typed up for us over here. Let's take a look. So, anybody who came in late, do not worry about it. We will send you a replay so that you can watch the shofar at Mount Sinai during the time of Moses. Someone wants to know who carved the shofar. Fascinating question. I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, that ram that I just made a reference to, the ram that Abraham found caught in a thicket, as the Bible tells us, very, very interestingly, the Midrash tells us that it wasn't any regular, ordinary ram. Its two horns are reserved for special occasions. So the first horn of that ram was used at the giving of the 10 Commandments, which is, by the way, another thing we remind God in this parable that I just mentioned of, that remember back when you gave us the 10 Commandments, you gave us the Torah, the Bible, you went and offered it to all the nations of the world, and nobody was interested except for us. We accepted upon ourselves what we call Kabbalat Ol, the willingness to follow you We followed God into the desert. We said, whatever you want from us, we'll do. So we remind them of that, of the sounding of the shofar by the giving of the Torah. And that was one of the ram's horns that came from the days of Abraham. What is going to happen with the second horn of that particular ram? That will be the shofar that will usher in and herald in the coming of Mashiach, of the era of world peace, which will happen imminently in our day-to-day. Great question. Thank you for asking that, James. Let's see if there's any other questions here. We have a whole bunch of them, actually. Let's see. All right. Pamela, you are most welcome. If anybody did have any issues with buffering or anything like that, relax. In the replay that we'll send you, it'll only be available for 28 hours. So when you get that email, you definitely want to click on that link and watch it. I encourage you to take advantage of that. Once again, I just want to remind you over here, we have our upcoming 4-week Sukkot course, which is the Feast of the Tabernacle. We're going to take you through every aspect. In reality, I should say that that's actually not doing it justice. The course will give you an understanding of the entire relationship that this time of the year has with us and our Creator. So it's going to take you from the process of the renewal of Rosh Hashanah and even beforehand, give you the historical perspective, all the way through to the chuppah, to the marriage, the wedding canopy that the Feast of Tabernacles represents, which is why it's in the shape, it covers you, and it's as if you're going to be receiving a hug, a divine hug, if you will. So we're going to pop that back up for you over here on the right side if you'd like to. There is a limited amount of space, and it is beginning very soon. So if you're interested in that, I definitely encourage you to join that very, very quickly. And I will send you that in just a moment over here. It should pop up right there on the right side of your screen. All right. And we thank you all for joining us and for giving us time at this busy time of the year. If you have anything else you'd like us to give a workshop on, I encourage you to join us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook, and you should, again, facebook.com/Hebraics, and we will be very, very happy to answer your questions. A quick poll I'm going to ask you to fill out over here. It should pop up on the right side over there. You should be able to see that. And I ask that you just let us know how this was for you between 1 and 10. And we thank you very much for joining. If there's any further questions, I'll be happy to answer those. If not, we will see you all in the upcoming course of the 4 weeks for the Feast of the Tabernacles, or in a future webinar if you can't make that one. One last question. Do you think there's a spiritual move when you blow the shofar? The answer is 100%. As we did in a previous webinar, there are multiple deeper meanings and names of God. The last webinar, we discussed the divine messages within the names of God. Many of those are supposed to be contemplated on while you blow the shofar. For those who are the masters of blowing the shofar, they know those. And those who aren't yet the masters, I encourage you to attend a seminar of the Hebraics Institute, which will teach you everything you need to know about blowing the shofar and even making your own shofar as well. And those will be in the near future. Thank you all for joining us, everybody. And we appreciate all the positive feedback. You guys are a great audience. And feel free to share all of those links that you got, for example, for the upcoming webinar or for the upcoming workshop with your friends. Of course, the goal here is to empower everybody to have access to this very important information so that our relationship with God can be enhanced, each and every one of us, and ultimately we're all headed in the same direction, which is when the coming of Mashiach, and each and every one of us will have not only an individual relationship with God, but we'll be able to access the deepest secrets and the most profound knowledge and essence of God, just the same way you could relate to another person right now. We'll see you all shortly. Have a wonderful, happy, and healthy, sweet New Year, and we'll end off on a blast as well, everybody. Hopefully that's a Tekiah Gedola. Bye-bye.